All right, let's talk Las Vegas Raiders as we're working our way through training camp, getting close to the first preseason game. Exciting time. We're going to see what the Raiders are going to look like, our first iteration of this team as we get closer to the 2025 regular season. But lost in the hustle and bustle of seeing some of these big names and new additions and all the exciting momentum behind this new Pete Carroll led Raiders squad. There's some under the radar, some underrated additions that should fill out key roles for this Raiders team, not just this season, but the future as well. And they're starting to reveal themselves. Exciting stuff in this latest Raiders report, which we'll get to in just 1 second. But first, I'm Nick. That is Andrew. And this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the Raiders did a phenomenal job this offseason handling a lot of the top line moves with the big names, right? Of course, Geno Smith, Ashton Genty, and then they needed wide receiver help. They crushed it with 2 wide receivers in the draft. Across the board, the big names, the starters, the stars emerging, crushing it. Spytek, Carroll, everything heading in the right direction. But the top line stars is not all that a team needs. They need quality pieces across the board to fill out a roster. And there's one underrated rookie, Caleb Rogers, the tackle out of Texas Tech, that looks to be emerging as one of the more underrated depth pieces and key positional value players in the entire Raiders rookie class. Let's get into the report here, then we'll get into the data on the other side. This is from the Raiders Wire. The Raiders had needs at both guard and tackle, and with 2 picks in a row at 98 99, they addressed both positions. First up was Caleb Rogers, Texas Tech, a tackle in college who the Silver and Black Raiders had designs on switching to guard. They say Silver and Black Raiders because the Texas Tech are the Red Raiders, for anyone who is unfamiliar with that. And since he arrived, he's not just playing guard, he's lined up at both guard spots and most recently center as well. I asked him if this was something he was prepared for this possibility. I'm a 5-stop shop, tackle, guard, center, wherever you want to put me, Rogers told teams during the draft process. I played tackle all college, and that's the type of player I want to be. I want to be someone that they can lean on me no matter where they need me to be. So same thing every now and then. I'll hop in and tackle and doing some indie reps if they need me to. So indie reps, it's individual period. That's working with your position group. So that's working on footwork, hand placement, just the technique kind of stuff. Or if someone needs rep, that's the thing they need me at least right now, but I still want to be available for it. So nothing's going to be a shock to me. If someone goes down tomorrow and they say, Caleb needs to play right tackle, let's ride, let's do it. So this is absolutely invaluable. And the fact that they have him playing both guards in the center position, this report actually highlights him getting some reps at center. If you look at the depth chart that's released, they actually have him at right guard. So across the board, he's a versatile guy in terms of what the Raiders have him doing in training camp, in terms of positions and team, but also individual drills. And if you look at his collegiate career, you can see why the Raiders were so high on his versatility. Let's pull up our first chart here to highlight exactly what I'm talking about. You got this little pie chart in front of you right here. So this is the snaps by position in his collegiate career at Texas Tech with Caleb Rogers. You can see 54% of his snaps were at right tackle, 35% of his snaps, 35.4 in blue there, were at left tackle, about 6.5 at left guard there in red, and about 4% right guard at gold. So he has a lot of experience. He played a lot of football in college. Each of these snap counts are well over 150, even the smallest number, right guard, over 100 snaps. So we look at a guy who's very experienced. He can play over the football field, not just experience at one position, but experience in a bunch. And that is incredibly invaluable because when you look at specific position groups, a lot of times, especially when you get to the NFL and even in college, you get pigeonholed in an area and you get stuck there. So let me give you an example of this. Let's go into our next chart right here, focusing on just the offensive tackles from the Raiders. So I looked at the weighted snap percentage that the current 3 tackles, Glaze, Colton Miller, and Grant, those are the 3 guys I selected here, and looked at in terms of the percent allocation to their highest weighted position. So for example, on the previous page, I showed that Rogers spent the most amount of time at right tackle, 54%. That's what you can see there on the left in blue, a little over 50. What do you notice with Glaze, Miller, and Grant? All 3 of them are 100. Grant's numbers are his college numbers. Glaze and Miller are their NFL numbers from last year. They don't switch. They don't change. And that's not uncommon, by the way. That's just what happens. People aren't versatile. You get pigeonholed. I don't say people aren't versatile. It's probably not the right word. People aren't given the opportunity to be versatile in the NFL. They get to a position and they're pigeonholed there and they get stuck. And that's just what they are forever. There's a little bit more volatility in terms of the center and guard positions just because of how things work out. We've seen that with Jackson Powers Johnson in training camp. But to have a guy in Rodgers who has this level of positional flexibility coming out of school is absolutely invaluable. A lot of times it takes these guys to get to the NFL. They realize they're not a starter, and then they have to figure out, okay, can I play multiple positions? Can I play left and right? A lot of times it's a guy that's like, okay, I can play center and guard, or I can play left tackle and right tackle, the traditional swing tackle. Caleb Rogers is a guy that can play all five positions, and that is incredibly valuable, folks. And that's why, to me, he's one of the hidden gems in this Raiders draft class. We know, like I mentioned in the beginning, the stars, the big names, the key playmakers, the starters are across the board generally well addressed. The Raiders have gotten a lot better in terms of the top of the roster talent, of course, coaching staff, GM staff as well. But you also need depth pieces. You need guys to fill out the roster when injuries happen, which we all know they will. A lot of teams have some stars. There's a lot of bad teams that have some really high level stars. The Cleveland Browns, for example, they got a lot of superstars on their team, believe it or not, but they're a terrible football team because their depth overall as a roster just isn't there. And of course, bad quarterback play doesn't help the cause either. So, how do you solve that problem? Drafting guys for depth, drafting guys because of their versatility, because of their willingness and ability to play every single position on the offensive line. Center, guards, both tackles, doesn't matter. Caleb Rogers, to me, is one of the more invaluable draft prospects of anyone coming out of the class. I know that sounds crazy when you look at quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs, but for the price of one third-round rookie, the Raiders essentially got a second string at five positions. That frees up a bunch of roster spots and frees up a bunch of opportunities for other players. Suddenly you get to carry an extra corner, an extra pass rusher, an extra receiver, whatever it may be. And that opens up a lot of doors for you as a roster that other teams don't have. I love this addition by the Raiders. I was a little confused at the time, especially since they selected Grant right next to him. But now that time has gone by and we see what the Raiders are using him in training camp and see how well he's doing, I think it's clear the Raiders pull off a really good move, great addition. The addition of Caleb Rogers, not something to sleep on. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But first, Raider Nation, Raiders fans, in the comment section below, we're talking, Swiss Army knives, right? Jack of all trades, guys who can do a bunch of different things, very versatile players. Give us in the comment section below your favorite kind of Raiders equivalent of all time that has that kind of role. Just a guy who played a bunch of different positions, positionless player, versatile, did whatever the team needed, right? Doesn't have to be up front on offensive line or really on offense. It can be anywhere on the football field. Give us your favorite version of that kind of player in Raiders history and put them in the comment section below. And while you're down there, as always, make sure you go to the description box and check out the link to our weekly newsletter, courtesy of the Substack platform. 100% free, doesn't cost you a thing. It's just extra content, extra articles, extra information to get you ready for the season. Plus, we highlight the best comments of the week. So if you have a great comment, you may find yourself in there. So make sure you check it out and sign up. There is a link in the description box below. But Mize, enough from me. Over to you. What are your thoughts on this latest out of Las Vegas?
Yeah, Nick, the more you talk about Rodgers to me, the more reminiscent he is to me of one player in particular that really jumps to the top of my head. And this is a guy that I don't think he was necessarily great at any position as far as across the offensive line. He probably, would start on some teams, but, in the team he was on in particular, he wasn't necessarily the best at that position at any given time. But when you talk about the Baltimore Ravens the last 6 or so years, there have been some really, I'd say upsetting injuries at key positions across the offensive line year in and year out. And it's kind of a scramble always to figure out who's going to be that guy, but not when you have a guy like Rodgers, who to me is very reminiscent of Patrick McCary, a guy out of Cal, came in as an undrafted free agent. And this is a guy who, we're talking college. Let's look at a guy whose NFL career could be very reminiscent of what Rodgers did over the course of his career in the NFL. Patrick McCary, 685 snaps at left tackle, 965 at left guard, 918 at center, 272 at right guard, 1200 at right tackle. This is a guy who's literally played all five positions for almost a season at each position at least. Very, very versatile, and is a guy who, like I said, maybe not necessarily your best tackle, your best guard, or your best center at any given time, but having a guy that can come in and slot in at any given position, it kept the Ravens competitive every year, whether it was Ronnie Stanley who went down, whether it was somebody else who went down at key positions and they have to switch people around. This is a team who really always had pretty solid offensive line play, and I credit a lot to a guy like Patrick McCary. I think this is the new Patrick McCary. The Raiders have found themselves a guy in Caleb Rogers who can be that type of player. He can slot in whenever you need it. Is he going to be all pro at any of those positions? Could be, but probably not. He's going to, be good enough though. He's going to be solid. He's not going to have you, hurting at any certain position. So to have a guy that, like you said, I'm 5 tool player, I can go in anywhere you want me to, tackle, guard, center, that is invaluable. And that's what good teams do. They look for guys that can come in and say, hey, people talk about how, important a swing tackle is. What about a swing every single position on the offensive line? That's super invaluable to have. I think this is a really big pickup for the Raiders, and people might not be talking about him now, but give it a couple seasons, have him come in and fill in at some crucial moments and do well enough at certain positions, and you'll think this was probably one of the most valuable offensive linemen the Raiders have drafted.
And I love the McCary comp because we've actually seen it out of the AFC and frankly out of the Raiders' biggest rival, the Kansas City Chiefs. What happened last season when they had issues at left tackle? What did they have to do? They had to slide their all-pro left guard Joe Tooney to left tackle, bring in a backup at left guard. It totally upset the apple cart of their offensive line, and then they got humiliated in the Super Bowl because, in my opinion, because they had an unstable offensive line. They had a second-string guard playing left guard and a left guard, a first-string left guard playing left tackle. Right? That's what happens when you have depth issues. That's what happens when you don't have versatile players. It's one of the reasons why swing tackles, just a tackle that can play left and right tackle, is so valuable. That's why it's so valuable when you find an interior offensive lineman that can play left guard, right guard, and can snap at the center position. Incredibly valuable. One thing that's just an almost an anomaly, except for the McCary example, is a guy that can play all five, and that is such a special thing. It's not just a guy that has the tools as well; it's a guy who's willing to do it. That's what I really like about Caleb Rogers. Like he's a guy who played a lot of football in college, could have had an ego, could have said, "Nope, I'm a right tackle," or whatever. I'm a left tackle. That's who I'm going to be. That's who I want to be. That's who I want to focus on. And if you listen to him, he wants to be a tackle, but he wants to help the Raiders win. And so when you talk about culture, you talk about the right mentality. That's exactly what you're getting with Caleb Rogers, a perfect team first guy doing whatever it takes to win. I know we get a lot of comparisons because we look at Pete Carroll. Oh, is it the Seattle Seahawks? John Spytek with what he did, working on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers staff. But let's take it back to the Tom Brady influence as a minority owner and his time with the Bill Belichick-led Patriots, right? That do your job, right? You're a football player. You're not what your position says on the depth chart. You're a football player. The Patriots will put wide receiver at corners. They'll put fullbacks at tight ends, and they'll make you play everything. They'll do whatever is best for the team. Starters on special teams. Patriots were famous for that. The Raiders, Caleb Rogers, that's exactly the kind of mentality he brings to this team. Listen, he's not a left tackle, he's not a right tackle, he's not a left guard, he's not a right guard, he's not a center, he's a football player, and he plays all five positions very well. He's willing and happy to do that. You talk about a culture shifter, a culture changer. It doesn't always have to be the stars. A lot of times we think of the guys that change the culture are, the biggest name guys, the superstars, the quarterbacks, things like that. Doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It can be those middle of the roster guys that earn the respect and the admiration of the team. I think Caleb Rogers is well on his way to becoming that kind of player for the Raiders.